Some people say a man is made out of mud. A poor man's made out of muscle and blood.
Royal Douglas Lewis was born in the summer of 1941 in La Mesa, Texas, weighing in at 8 pounds, 12 ounces, and 21 inches long. His parents, A.J. and May Oma Lewis, had recently built a home on their family farm near Ackerley. That would be the family homestead for raising all 4 Lewis kids, including Royal's older sister, Mary Lou, and younger brothers, Doyle and Ike. Cotton farming was in Royal's blood, with his Lewis grandparents farming and living on land near A.J. and May Oma's farm. The importance of cotton farmers to the national war effort, which was beginning to ramp up in 1941, may have been one reason why no men in Royal's family were ever drafted for service after the bombing of Pearl Harbor just 6 months after Royal's birth.
We were dryland farmers, okay? And in 1950, we made really good crops. And then we had 55 was a pretty good crop. And we had a couple of crops in there that weren't good crops, Right. And anytime that happened, that hurt all of us. And of course, Royal, like me, started driving tractors and stuff like that when we were probably, I would guess, 10 or 12 years old or younger.
While farming was his heritage, Royal was fascinated as a child by the Old West. Reading books about the cattle drives, watching westerns about courageous lawmen of the Wild West, and owning more than one coonskin hat.
And Royal was a consummate outdoorsman and frontiersman, a cowboy. He loved horses and cattle. He loved hunting and fishing and boating. He learned how to trap and track and do all those kinds of skills. And basically, he just loved all things outdoors.
From an early age, Royal loved the water.
Royal did water skiing and stuff and that sort of thing, but Lake Thomas was not a long ways from us, and I spent a lot of time at Lake Thomas water skiing, and I suspect he could spend some time over there with us because we were good enough for us to do that. But
his family took trips to area and regional lakes, and Royal began his lifelong love of boating. Church was a major part of life for the Lewises, and they attended the Ackerley Church of Christ 3 times a week, where his grandfather regularly led the congregation in the hymn, "Leaning on the Everlasting Arms," which remained one of Royal's favorite songs throughout his life. Royal's father, A.J., had a heart condition that made him lose consciousness at a moment's notice, prompting Royal to obtain his hardship driver's license at the age of 14. Later that year, Royal's father died, leaving behind a wife and 4 children between the ages of 5 and 18. Shortly thereafter, Royal's maternal grandparents moved to Ackerley to help Royal and his brother Doyle, age 11, provide for the family in their new role as full-time farmers. Like his mother, who played basketball for Abilene Christian College, Royal was a standout athlete in basketball as well as discus throwing and high jumping.
He participated in track and field along with basketball, football, this sort of thing. And we participated a lot in first 4-H type activities. Both he grew up on a farm, I grew up on a farm, raised cattle and stuff. And I showed black English cattle and calves, and he showed different things.
He was active in 4-H and FFA, winning a number of awards and honors, including the pinnacle of the Texas FFA's livestock husbandry program, the Lone Star Farmer Award. The year he graduated, his class voted to rename Ackerley schools to Sands High School in 1959. But the name change didn't take effect until after Royal's graduation.
Of course, we participated from first grade through the 12th, and then, as I was telling you earlier, Our whole class was very close. It wasn't just, Royale was my best friend in high school. And, but we've been very close, all of us, the whole class, for this 62 years, But we had a very close relationship. And as I said, our whole class was a special class. We all cared about each other. We all loved each other. And we've stuck together all these years, and it's been a fun time.
Little did he know when he graduated from Ackerley High School, he would remain lifelong friends with every member of his class, who up until the COVID-19 pandemic were still meeting regularly at reunions around the state.
Rainy day. You ask how much I need you. Must I?
Carol Sue Patterson was born in Snyder during the fall of 1943 to Homer and Jessie B. Patterson. Homer was a farmer and cattle rancher by trade, and the young couple bought about 600 acres of land west of Fluvanna, Texas, shortly after being married. When Carol was just a year old, her father, at the young age of 32, diagnosed himself with stomach cancer through his own encyclopedic research, a diagnosis which sadly was confirmed by doctors a short time later. As was the norm of the time, he was hospitalized with the illness for 8 long months in Snyder until his death in 1945. As a young mother and now widow with no source of income, the loss was surely devastating. Within weeks, Jessie B. was working in the school cafeteria of the Fluvanna School before she decided to run for county and district clerk of Borden County. Her father-in-law, Mert Patterson, drove her all over the county to gin up votes for the race she won in November of 1946. The election meant Carol and Jessie B. would be moving to the county seat of Gale, where they rented a room from Addie Jackson, a woman who happened to have a single son named O.D., who Jessie B. would later describe as the best-looking thing I had ever seen. O.D. Jackson and Jessie B. married in 1947 when Carol was 4 years old, and the couple had 2 more children, Dawn and Catherine.
I remember one time I went, it was after Aunt Jessie B. had married O.D. Jackson, and I went to Gale and spent several days. They lived in this old ramshackle farmhouse, and the water came out of a cistern in the backyard, and the lights were kerosene lamps, and the radio was powered by a battery charged by the wind charger. We spent a lot of time outside digging in the dirt, but I guess that's when Aunt Jessie was still the county clerk working at the courthouse, and I remember us playing in the courthouse. We especially liked to play judge and jury. I always insisted I had to be the judge, and Carol always gave in because I was the oldest, and she would have to be the prosecuting attorney, and we would have this imaginary victim that we were prosecuting, and of course he was always guilty, and then we would take him outside and put him in the jail, and we would feel so righteous that we had taken care of the evil that was in Gale. We had a good time together.
Hello, baby.
As a young girl, Carol would become a fixture in the Borden County Courthouse, supposedly standing on the corner of what is now Highway 80 and FM Road 669 to holler across the street to people at the post office, cafe, the Rock gas station, or anyone who would listen. County employees reportedly urged Jessie B. to put Carol in school a year early, presumably to get her out of the county employees' hair. She was a particularly bright student, and upon entering 2nd grade, teachers determined that she knew most everything the 2nd graders were expected to know and advanced her to the 3rd grade, thereby skipping 2nd grade. Being in the 3rd grade and 2 years younger than the rest of her classmates didn't quite know what to make of young Carol.
Your mom was so much smaller than the rest of us. Well, she was 2 years younger than we were. And we kind of didn't have a lot to do with her because she was a little kid. and we were 2 years older. I mean, whoa, we were older, big kids. And even the coach called her Little Carol, which she didn't care for too much. She grew out of that, and he got to calling her Snake Juice. But that was, we snubbed her for not 3 years, but a couple of years, till she grew a little bit and we got to know her more. But, you know, we just couldn't figure out how anybody could be 2 years younger, pass all those grades without, you know, and be with us, because we were very mature and that way.
One of the small blessings of losing her father so young and being welcomed into the Jackson family was that she had 3 sets of cousins: the Jacksons, the Pattersons, and the Odoms, and she treasured them all as much in childhood as she did until the end of her life.
Oh, I'd say, Carol is so remembered for just a big personality. She had a big laugh, she had a big smile, and she was a little bit older than me, so I was a little boy part of the time, and she spent some time with my family and my folks when she was a young teenager, and her and my mother's niece were there together, young girls. And they would laugh and squeal. Carol could squeal, loud enough to make the dogs run in the neighborhood almost. And I just remember watching them and thinking, how much fun that they had.
In high school, Carol played basketball, served as an officer in the Future Homemakers of America, or FHA, participated in 4-H, and was a majorette in the pep squad. And by the time her class graduated school, they were very close and would remain so for many years. Particularly when everyone's kids were grown and classmates began to retire, Carol was instrumental in helping plan reunions and get-togethers for her Borden High School class of 1960.
I think we had a real good class. I always felt that we did. And so then your mom was a teacher and married your dad. She had y'all. I had my kids. We got busy and it just didn't work out that we were together. And so I have enjoyed these last years because we were able to be together, and she and I would go and we'd get Gina, and then we'd meet Donna in Midland, and we'd have lunch, things like that. It was just very special. And your mother and I really basically grew closer in these last few years. And it's been a real neat thing. We'd sit at ball games together, and your mother would say, "Who are those people?" I go, "I don't know. You're asking me who those people? I don't know them." Well, she'd have to find out. She just couldn't stand it if she didn't know who they were.
But as much fun as high school was for Carol, the best was yet to come.
My love must be a kind of blind love. I can't see anyone.
In 1960, when Carol showed up at Lubbock Christian College in the middle of what was then a cotton field on the outskirts of Lubbock, Royale had already been there a year, having been granted a scholarship to play basketball for the young college. But word has it that Carol already had her sights set on Royale well before she arrived, having watched the tall, blue-eyed athlete when Borden County played Ackerley back in high school. And Royale didn't put up much of a fight either. Royale began his rodeo career in earnest at Lubbock Christian, joining the large rodeo club on campus. Between basketball and rodeo, Royale couldn't have much free time, but he was a member of the Koinonia Men's Social Club, and, probably at the insistence of Carol, joined the a cappella chorus, one of the university's 2 traveling choirs.
For the friends and family of R.D. and Carol Lewis, I've had the joy of knowing their children, Shelley and Amy and Sean, for almost 40 years now, initially through growing up at Camp Blue Haven and working at Camp Blue Haven, and now as a faculty member of Lubbock Christian University for almost 25 years now, knowing them as alumni, as former choral members of our choral program is coming back to reunions and seeing R.D. and Carol and receiving their contributions toward our music program. They have truly left a lasting legacy, and we are so thankful for that. We want to honor them now with this recording of the LCU Praise Choir singing "Hark, I Hear the Harps Eternal," again in honor of R.D. and Carol Lewis.
Hark, I hear the harps eternal, ringing on the farther shore, as I near those golden waters.
In addition to the a cappella and Meistersinger choruses, Carol was also in Kappa Phi Kappa Women's Social Club and a regular at Royale's basketball games and rodeos.
I want to tell you about my first college roommate at Lubbock Christian.
I'm reading a letter that I wrote to Carol in her yearbook, probably 1961, after our first semester there at Lubbock Christian. Dear Carol, as I sit here, my mind goes back to several months ago. I remember the day I walked into this room and met you. My first opinion was one of surprise and amazement as I got to know you. I've never known anyone quite like you. I guess you know you had a great part as an influence in my decision to be baptized. I shall never forget that Sunday. I only hope that my faith may be strong as yours. Truly, you have helped me grow both spiritually and mentally. I shall always remember my first roommate. I have no sad or bad memories, only those of good times we had. You are a wonderful person. I want to wish you the very best in whatever you do. May God look down and guide your footsteps. I love you, Cynthia.
In her last year at Lubbock Christian, and Royale already having graduated LCC, he enrolled at Texas Tech and the couple married in June 1962 at the Gale Church of Christ. Now, Carol had learned that some of her friends were going to decorate R.D.'s going-away car with paint, food, and the like, so Carol's dad hid the car behind Old Man Keene's house east of the Jackson farm and planned to take them to it. Sure enough, Carol's crazy friends chased Carol and Royale as Carol's dad led the caravan at high speeds over freshly terraced fields near the side of the car, making the car go airborne multiple times until they finally lost the hooligans, and Carol and Royale were able to leave on their honeymoon without further incident.
You couldn't love Carol as a friend without loving Royale too. They were a package deal. Royale was always so funny. He loved to tell stories about Carol, about some of her antics. And she had many, but he always told them in such a teasing way with a chuckle and a twinkle in his eye. It was just precious.
The couple would both spend another semester at Texas Tech before enrolling at West Texas State University in Canyon before graduating together in the spring of 1964. Upon graduation, Royale went to work as a health inspector for the city of Amarillo, and Carol taught school at Crockett Elementary in Amarillo. With the Vietnam War heating up, Royale decided to proactively enter officer candidate school in the United States Marine Corps. The couple moved to Virginia, where Royale completed basic training in 1966. He was shipped to Vietnam to serve shortly thereafter. While Royale was in Vietnam, Carol lived with Royale's Aunt Ruby in Seminole, where Carol taught school for the 67 to 68 school year. Royale and Carol exchanged dozens of letters, love notes, and Dad's not suitable for young grandchildren artwork, which he sent to Carol on more than one occasion. Since Royale's passing, daughter Shelley and son-in-law Scott have by chance found a neighbor in Kerrville who served under Captain Royale Lewis. Former Staff Sergeant Rick Heyman speaks here about the role Captain Lewis played in his career and life.
I was a staff sergeant. And that was, I'm sure, was highly due to Captain Lewis, because to make E6 in 4 years is almost unheard of in the Marine Corps, unless you get a combat promotion. Sometimes you make it past that one, but That's not a good way to make it. That means somebody had to give up their life to move you up. So, but yeah, I'm sure he had a lot to do with that. And I'll be forever grateful.
When asked about what kind of commanding officer Captain Lewis was, former Staff Sergeant Heyman had this to say.
That's what I want to know. He was wonderful. He was great. You couldn't ask for a better CO than Captain Lewis. I didn't have that many COs. And, you know, I had spent 2.5 years there. And, of course, I had Captain Lewis. Most of the time I was there. So, yeah, great.
Like most all Vietnam vets, Royal didn't experience the hero's welcome home expected today. At that time, the government had contracted with commercial airlines to bring soldiers home. And on one of his last flights home from Vietnam, his flight from El Paso to Midland was on the tarmac ready to take off when the plane unexpectedly taxied back to the terminal. A Continental Airlines staff member approached Royal and asked him to exit the plane while in uniform, so that a paying customer could have his seat. While Carroll and Royal spoke fondly of this time in the Marines while stateside, he didn't speak often about Vietnam until years later, even though his role leading supply lines of troops and supplies spared him from much of the trauma of war others experienced. In ceremonies that began in Borden County schools several years ago, Royal was proud to be honored by the community at Veterans Day programs alongside other Borden County veterans. After being shipped home from Vietnam, Royal was promoted to captain and was stationed at Camp Pendleton near San Diego. It was here that Royal resumed rodeoing with the Pendleton Rodeo Team. Carroll and Royal had their first child, Shelley, and the couple met lifelong friends Lee and Gloria Larson.
You know, when I was a little boy growing up, your parents were stationed at Camp Pendleton, and they started going to the church that we were going to when I was a kid. And right from the very beginning, our parents hit it off big time, and they just spent so much time together, being together for meals and, you know, getting together after church and just hanging out. But from a very young age, I watched them as they were following God and loving God with all their hearts, and really just having a great time with life, experiencing the joy of life. I remember going to the rodeo. They used to have a rodeo on Sundays at Camp Pendleton, and I was so blown away because your dad was like amazing at, you know, riding anything from riding the bucking broncos to, you know, roping steers and everything in between. And I used to think that was the coolest thing. And still to this day, my dad and I talk about going there and being a part of that every weekend, and just great memories.
In 1970, Royal resigned from active duty as a proud Marine, having won commendations in pistol and rifle accuracy, a commendation for valor in Vietnam, and having achieved the rank of captain. He continued his service in the Marine Corps Reserves, and the young family moved back to Texas to begin farming near Fluvanna.
I got 160 acres in the valley, got 160 acres of the best.
In 1970, after being honorably discharged from the U.S. Marine Corps, Royal and Carroll and Shelley moved back to West Texas, where they settled near Fluvanna to live in Aunt Sis's house on Possum Holler Road. There, Royal started farming cotton and raising cattle, which he and the family continued until moving to Gale in 1989. Even after moving, they continued raising cattle on the home place. Shelley loved being with any baby calves that needed bottle feeding and let them suck on her fingers. That was all well and good until one calf contracted rabies and gave her parents quite the scare. Royal was hired on as deputy sheriff for Scurry County by Sheriff Keith Collier. Keith, his wife Janice, and Royal's eventual deputy partner, Jim Crownover, would go on to become their lifelong friends, and Royal would introduce Jim to Carroll's friend Wanda.
On about November of '72, I had just been transferred to Snyder with my job with the USDA, and there happened to be a wreck fairly close to or where I lived at the time. And I just happened to stop by and saw a tall cowboy-looking fella with a badge on, and got to visiting with him, and we discovered we had a few things in common. Of course, he invited me to go to church with him and Carol. And I got to meet him and the girls. And when I was riding with him, R.D. Suggested that I might want to develop a social life. And he knew of a girl that had a lady, let's say, that was a teacher that had gone to LCU, and turned out we had been there at the same time and didn't know it. And he introduced me to Wanda at church, and of course Wanda and I dated off and on for the years that I was there at Snyder.
To better serve as a deputy for Scurry County, the Lewises moved to Snyder, where Amy would be born soon thereafter. Carol continued her work as a housewife and mother to Shelley and Amy, and before long she became involved in teaching Bible classes at Eastside Church of Christ. She and her good friend, Barbara McCormick, developed innovative curriculum for their 6th grade class there and taught many children of God's love and power. Even Royale contributed as an occasional narrator for Bible stories recorded on cassette tapes. The family made numerous lifelong friends at Eastside and continued to be active there even after moving back to Fluvanna in 1974, where Sean would soon join the family. Church members considered it a great treat when church gatherings and teen devotionals were held out at the Lewis place in Fluvanna. Everyone enjoyed riding horses, three-wheelers, weenie roasts, singing, and homemade ice cream. While living in Fluvanna, Royale and Carol attended the Fluvanna Church of Christ on Wednesday nights and made fast friends of Don and Nelva Jones. Don, always a jokester, teased Carol relentlessly, which she of course loved.
Dad was sitting at a round table there by the back door. He'd sit there and drink a little coffee and smoke a Camel. He's sitting there. We had a big old lazy Susan in the middle of that table, and so he had got her, Shelley, and put her on top of that lazy Susan and was just spinning her around, and she was having a heck of a time. He thought it was kind of funny, so I got a drink left, and I'm guessing they never told Carol this, because a few weeks later they came over, same thing. I go in the house, except Shelley's trying to crawl up on top of the table, and Carol is slapping her off of it. And finally she says, "I don't know what's the matter with this child. I don't know why she's acting this way. I've never seen her try to get on top of the table here." I looked over at my dad, had a big old grin on his face, but nothing was ever said.
In 1980, Carol and Nelva decided they should become EMTs for Borden County. Both received their EMT certifications, and the adventures, and sometimes misadventures, began.
Carol and Nelva were in on the very first EMT thing in Borden County. There was an old ambulance, and they studied hard and tried to help people and drove the ambulance. And one time a man ran a pickup off in the creek over there west of our house, and he crawled out on the road. They wheeled up there and got the ambulance and got him all strapped to the board. I guess they thought his neck was kind of messed up or something, because they put this big plastic thing around his neck, kind of a brace. He wasn't looking too good, but they got him loaded up, and then they decided I need to go with them in case they needed help unloading or something. So I get in the ambulance, and we roll off down to Cogdra Memorial Hospital there in Snyder. Wheel up there and unload this fella. They roll him in there, and I'm right behind them. I roll him in the ER, and the doctor says, "Did you think there's something wrong with his neck?" And they said, "Oh, we put that on there. He might needed it, you know." The doctor says, if he didn't have a neck injury, he may have one now, because that collar's on backwards.
Once, Carol even practiced her EMT skills on the broken leg of Sean's favorite chicken, Sweetie, despite her lifelong dislike of chickens and other birds. In 1983, with children in 8th, 6th, and 3rd grades, Carol decided to go back to teaching school, joining the staff at Borden County ISD. She taught junior high math and English for several years before adding high school English for the rest of her career. When Carol's students complained about the homework or her take-no-prisoners grading style, she would remind them that she wasn't there for a popularity contest, She was there to teach.
I came to Borden County the second semester of my freshman year, and I'd already been warned by some of my classmates about how mean she was, and so I was already terrified, on top of being incredibly nervous about starting public school and hoping I could even, just meet the bar. And the first day, her and I just hit it off and never looked back. She was not only my favorite teacher, but one of my best friends, and that's never changed. I consider her family, I loved her to death.
Carol had a number of close friends throughout her teaching career, but few were closer than Sherry Poole, who along with husband Dennis were the Lewis's closest neighbors in Gale. Some of her students went on to be teachers at Borden County, noting that Mrs. Lewis inspired them as a teacher, a UIL coach, a mentor, and a friend.
As a teacher, she invested in her students. And she didn't care whether you were an athlete or non-athlete. She didn't care where you were from or who you were or who other people thought you were. She wanted you to be you. And when I transferred here as a freshman, I needed that. And so she helped me find my place in UIL. And that became a love of mine, and it is today. And I encourage my kids, I hope, like she has encouraged so many people. But UIL was just something that fit me, and I could do it, and she knew I could do it, and she helped me find the events that were good for me. And she was so much fun on those trips and outside of class.
In 1987, Don and Nelva Jones helped the Lewis children to plan a surprise 25th wedding anniversary party for Royale and Carol out at the Joneses' house. The party was Amy's brainchild, and everyone from Nelva to Aunt Charlotte pitched in to make it happen.
We just came over to pick up some hot dogs. Amy's got a dress on. Oh my goodness. Charlotte is the
Yeah, hey there, y'all take care of this one.
Thanks for making.
And the fun didn't stop there. The couple reenacted feeding each other cake and punch, much to the displeasure of Royale. They pretended not to like the attention, but the party, and especially some of the more adult-oriented gifts they received, were spoken of for years to come. It would be another 25 years before their children would plan another anniversary party, but nothing could outdo the 25th, celebrated with more than 50 of their closest friends, neighbors, and relatives.
Out in the West Texas town of El Paso.
In 1988, R.D. was the chief appraiser for Borden County. Having become friends with then Sheriff Slick Sneed, Slick informed him he would be retiring at the end of his term and encouraged R.D. to run, which he did, winning the four-man race in a runoff election. Living in Fluvanna, R.D. knew he needed to move closer to the center of the county. But Carol wouldn't have it unless they could pick up their beloved forever home and move it to Gale. So move the house they did. At the time, the county had no funding for a deputy, leaving R.D. as the lone lawman in the county. When a Fort Worth Star-Telegram reporter passed through and learned about the lone sheriff, who also served as the county's tax assessor, tax collector, chief appraiser, and unofficially the fire marshal and dog catcher, they published a front-page story about R.D. that captured the imagination of the state with subsequent articles in the Dallas Morning News, Houston Chronicle, and other statewide papers, as well as a college textbook.
I worked under him as a deputy sheriff when he was a sheriff. I went through about 3 of them, but R.D. was the best one I had. I was patrolling for mule shoe out there and catching poachers and everything. And I was around this tank and there was a foot there that I swear I could put my knee down and he'd go, it was, oh gosh, he was a big foot and I was dreading to come up on him. And one day R.D. said, I'd like to go with you around. I said, yeah, come on, we'll make a round out there. He kind of showed him around. And luckily, R.D. was with me. We found a car over and I went over and there was that Bigfoot. And he was one big guy. And I was so happy R.D. was with me. And I told him he couldn't fish in there. He didn't give me any trouble, but I had R.D. with me and that helped a whole bunch.
R.D. loved most all parts of his 12 years in office, but especially his co-workers who enjoyed Halloween parties together every year and threw Sheriff Lewis a 50th birthday party in 1991. R.D.'s membership in the Sheriff's Association of Texas qualified his children for college scholarships from the organization which gave him great pleasure to help award.
Taylor County Sheriff John Middleton today presented the $500 award to Amy Lewis. She's the daughter of Borden County Sheriff R.D. Lewis. The Sheriff's Association of Texas awards the scholarship each year to a top student who is also the child of a Texas peace officer.
Having been faithful members of Eastside Church of Christ in Snyder for 19 years, but now living in Gale, R.D. and Carol felt they needed to attend and support the Gale Church of Christ. Friends at Eastside weren't too happy about that.
And it was only after they moved the house to Gale that they started going to church out there. And that wasn't fair. She needed to be back in with us. And but we still got to see her a lot. She still came into ladies' Bible class. And she'd go buy groceries and take them to Angeli's and put them in the refrigerator. And some days we'd catch a quick lunch.
But church in Gale, transitory as it could be with teachers and coaches from the school moving in and out of town regularly, was a blessing to the Lewises, and they to the church.
They were the rock and the glue that kept the Gale Church of Christ going. They kept it grounded. They did so much there, but also they did so much behind the scenes that no one knew, you know.
And every time a preschool or elementary age kid darkened the door of the church building, Carol grabbed her Sunday school teaching bag, always at the ready, and led them back to the Sunday school class. Tyler and Kate Wallace, Avery and Brandon Avery, and lots more kids came to know the stories of the Bible through Carol's faithful teaching each week. R.D. lived his faith in such a way that drew others to God, sometimes without them knowing it.
R.D. was that kind of guy, a lifelong lesson type deal for examples, but he never knew he was doing it until it was over with. And then you had to think about what did he just do? His way to teach and his way to share. Remember when he surprised me and said, "Dennis, you lead us in closing prayer." And I about fell out of my boots. I did the best I could. And then from then on, he involved us more and more and called on me more and more, and I think that helped me grow there.
In 1999, Carol detected a lump in her breast. After a lumpectomy didn't completely remove all of the cancer, she had a mastectomy. telling friends who were trying to console her about the loss of a breast, "I'm not worried about it in the slightest. I got all the use out of it I needed with Royale and the kids." Initially, she shielded her students from her hair loss. They were supportive, and ultimately she taught them not just lessons on English, but also how to face adversity head-on. As with all her life's challenges, Carol faced her cancer treatment not only with a fierce determination, missing only 2 days of work during her many months of chemo, but also with a great sense of humor. In one case, a student actually worked her wig into a student video project, and as always, she was happy to play along.
Look at the empty chairs. Is this not just like last year? Can't anybody get to this place on time?
Drop.
Well, honestly, it is just like Robert and Jana and Adriana and Lindsay. Who cares what time we come to school?
No,
I have had it. It's just going to drive me crazy.
Friends and family noticed a change in Carol after breast cancer. A softness, maybe more patience, and outward displays of affection. As her mother had done through her battle with ALS, Carol never asked why and never complained. And after she was cancer-free, she seemed to love and appreciate life even more. RD had a lot of hobbies throughout his life, but his love for horses never waned. Practically every kid that visited RD and Carol's house in Gale or Fluvanna was put on a horse at one time or another. He worked hard to instill the love and care of animals into his children and grandchildren in large part through his devotion to his horses. Besides his early rodeo days, one hobby allowed him to combine his love of riding with sport. In his late 50s, RD began reading, researching, and buying equipment to begin a new hobby, that of polo. The open field between the Lewis home and the school housing to the north was cleared of mesquite so that RD could practice his polo game. Occasionally, RD would load up his horse and tack and head to Lubbock or Midland on Saturday to play chukkers with other polo players in the area. Like all his hobbies, by the time RD had tired of it, he was an expert on the subject and still had all his polo equipment in the saddle shop at the time of his passing. Carol had learned to sew from her mother, honing her skill at the craft in FHA and 4-H, where she won sewing competitions as a young lady. And apparently, she started pretty early. The caption on this photo from her childhood says, "The curtains I made when we turned the old chicken coop into my playhouse." These skills came in particularly handy when she became a mother of 2 daughters. She made Easter dresses, school clothes, formal dresses, bridesmaids' dresses, prom gowns, and more. While daughter Amy was in college, Carol went to Abilene and sewed a formal dress for Amy's roommate, who couldn't afford to buy one. Throughout the years, she made curtains and other housewares for all her children's homes, and even for some of their friends. She mended clothes for just about anyone in town who needed it.
Yes, I do not sew. My mother tried to teach me how to sew, but I wasn't interested and needed some things mended. And she said, "Well, I can mend that for you." And I said, "Are you sure?" And she said, "Yes." So Dennis would rip a shirt, she'd mend it, or sew belt loops on his jeans and anything hemmed. She didn't really like to cut stuff off and hem it, but she would if I was sweet, you know. And then Casey would have some mending. "Can you mend this?" And I said, "No, but I know somebody that might will." And so Casey, I said, "You have to ask her." So she'd mend Casey's stuff, and then Callie got to where she'd bring home some mending, and she just seemed to love to be able to do it for everybody.
In later life, Carol made a point to teach kids in town to sew. They would often come over and make scrunchies with Carol at her trusty Bernina sewing machine. In 1993, Carol would take on her most challenging sewing project ever, agreeing to make her daughter Shelley's white velvet wedding dress with pearl accents, as well as Amy's red velvet bridesmaid dress. When Shelley walked down the aisle, Carol's love for her daughter was on full display for all to see. One of R.D.'s most enduring hobbies was leatherworking. As well as his other hobbies, he began by reading, studying, analyzing, and speaking to experts on the subject well before he bought his first piece of leather. He purchased all the prerequisite tools, set up a workshop in the saddle shed, and set about to make leather crafts. He started with leather chaps or chinks, which became treasured items not only for family members, but for many young men in Gale.
This is a pair of chinks that R.D. made back in the early 90s when we was in high school. Actually, I think we traded some tractor work for them, and anyway, R.D. made it for me. There's no telling how many thousands of head of cattle these things have seen back in the day. We used them everywhere. My son actually used them later in life as when he was shoeing horses and trimming horses.
R.D. taught and assisted the grandkids with leather crafts too, and for a couple of years there, every woman in the family got a handmade leather purse from R.D. In some cases, he used leatherworking as a way to mentor local youth.
R.D. and Carol were godly people. They were our mother and fathers to many of us throughout the years. R.D. and Carol meant so much to me. R.D. took me riding horses. He's the one who taught me how to ride horses. He taught me how to ride up my 10-speed bicycle up Gale Mountain, and we did that many a times. One of the things that R.D. did for me was he made me a pair of chaps that were custom made because he did a lot of leather work. And if you look in here, he custom made where it says Jade H. And he custom made these. And he's gonna be missed, and Carol's gonna be missed. But they were a second family to me, and we will always love them.
The culmination of his leatherworking was construction of saddles. Of the 16 or so saddles we have photographs of, most were given away or sold at deep discounts to area cowboys. He made roping saddles, women's saddles, riding saddles, and bronc saddles, starting with just the wooden skeleton called a tree. The basket weave pattern was his signature design element, and like all his hobbies, he was an expert in it by the time he was ready for his next hobby.
Sometimes I call you, I know I can't reach you. To hear your voicemail, sorry I missed you. Wish I could go back, tell my old self that you don't have the time to not make time, it goes fast. And I was living like you'd live forever, and it took losing you to learn to love better. To be the daughter who comes home more often, who holds on to a goodbye hug a little longer. To be the best friend who promised to check in, and the kind of sister my brother always needed, who takes time to call just to say hey, 'cause you loved me that way. The first to show up an hour early, front row in the bleachers to make sure you could see me. You stood in the doorway for every loved me that way. You loved me that way.
I got sent home from school one day with a shiner on my eye. Fighting was...
After R.D. retired as Borden County Sheriff and Tax Assessor in 2001, Carol wasn't too sure whether she was ready to join him or not. Though she was eligible to retire, she still enjoyed teaching, was able to see her new granddaughter Jessie B in nearby Snyder, and she openly wondered if she and R.D. would get in each other's way if they retired at the same time. But when daughter Amy, a resident of Arlington, announced she and husband Chad were pregnant with twins in October 2001, Carol decided it was time to retire, telling friends, "It's time to retire because Amy will need my help." R.D. and Carol went to Arlington for the twins' birth on Wednesday, May 29th, and then returned to Gale that night so Carol could teach her last 2 days of school. A new phase of life had begun for Carol and R.D. In the late 90s, R.D. started one of many retirement-era hobbies, returning to his lifelong love of the water and boats. Carol wasn't too sure about this one, as she rightly suspected she would be the second set of hands needed to sail these big boats. But after a little practice on the water, they both loved it, joking that nobody in their right mind would take up sailing living in the middle of arid West Texas. They sailed Lake Allen Henry, Possum Kingdom, Lake Ivy, and Lake Brownwood, to name a few, making many friends in the West Texas sailing community along the way. While Amy lived in Austin, R.D. once drove his sailboat to Lake Travis and took Amy and her friends on a memory-filled adventure. When Carol was undergoing chemotherapy for breast cancer, the couple would retreat to Possum Kingdom on the boat where Carol could rest and recuperate. 4 sailboats later and a couple of tired packs, the couple eventually retired from the sport, but not without having made hundreds of memories and having hosted dozens of friends and relatives on boating adventures. In 2005, Carol announced to her family her intention to run for Borden County ISD School Board, much to their collective surprise. Carol was living a busy and happy retired life at the time, but wanted to continue contributing to the school system she loved so much. At the time of her election, she was the first ever woman school board member in Borden County.
So when I reflect on Miss Lewis and the impact she had on this school district, it is a bit humbling. Mrs. Lewis wanted Borden County to be the best in every aspect. Mrs. Lewis took her appointment to the board very seriously. She had more school board training hours than all of the other 6 members and myself combined. She was a true advocate for these children, and she was a true advocate for our staff.
During her 15-year tenure, a new school complex was built, 2 superintendents were hired, including the school's first woman superintendent, and more recently, a new playground was constructed that Carol had a lot of fun showing to her grandkids.
It's upside down! It feels like,
Many friends and family have likely suffered hearing loss after sitting next to Carol at football and basketball games, which she and R.D. attended faithfully.
One thing I learned very quickly when I came to Borden County is Miss Lewis was the Coyotes' #1 fan. She was the epitome of Borden County. She loved all the Coyotes. And I've never been to a game at Borden County, playing in it or watching it, that she wasn't there waving the paw, which we need to put in a shadow box or in a trophy case or something. She just truly cared about and loved Borden County.
In addition to her school board duties, Carol was passionate about the all-school reunion held every 5 years for former students at Borden High School. She was usually in charge of tracking down former students to make sure they got the invite and attended, using legendary investigation skills that would make Sherlock Holmes look like an amateur. And why wouldn't she be just the right person for the job? She was a connector her whole life. From childhood to retirement, Carol loved staying in touch with everyone. In addition to helping organize the reunions, Carol and RD continued to give back to the community after retirement, with Carol joining the Borden County Historical Commission and RD serving on the Gale Cemetery Board. In their final years on this earth, RD and Carol continued doing the things they had always done, caring for their neighbors, serving their church, loving their kids and grandkids unconditionally, making new friends while staying connected to old ones, and displaying the character and neighborly love that made them beloved members of the Borden County community and beyond. As we close this final chapter on the life of RD and Carol, some of their friends, new and old, tell the stories of two people who lived their faith, demonstrating the fruits of God's Spirit within them: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control.
And they embraced us being here and took us in and accepted us as if we were their own flesh and blood family. When I think of your dad, I think of a life well lived. You know, he was gracious. I never saw him be ill to anyone. He was gracious and kind, and always that I saw gave everyone the benefit of the doubt. He did not want to be judgmental. You know, he always had a kind thing to say to somebody or something to say in someone's defense, including me. I think in a way he brought out good in me as well. RD had a faith that was not something that I ever saw that was shaken. You know, he had a conviction and knew without a doubt. There was a confidence there. I never saw doubt.
Mr. and Mrs. Lewis were the epitome of the good neighbor. Following the example of Jesus in loving your neighbor as themselves. Farewell, my neighbor and friend. Where do I even start to describe the hole that is left in my heart? From the first day we met while unloading the bed, she welcomed us to BC with warm banana nut bread. For those who knew her well, she always had a story about her family to tell. The grandkids had done this, the kids had done that. Her smile was so bright when she shared their lives as we sat. For my girls, there was giggling from shouts of the rooster rants when Mrs. Lewis had chased them off, colander aimed and pecking at her pants. For those who called her their sister in Christ, her actions to serve showed a faith unpriced. She was happy to show up and put in the work. Bringing coffee and sausage balls sure gave Sunday lessons a perk. For those who called her mother, my heart aches for you like no other. She was the pillar of strength, toiling, praying, serving long hours at length. For those who called her grandmother, what a joy you each brought to her. She was a grandmother to my kids and plenty, always wanting to cook or sew with so many. It's been a long time since we've seen the blur of blue as she went around the school checking on me and you. While our heads know she's with Jesus, it gives us a peace that frees us. Royale holding her hand as they sing, "We are in the glory land." We remember her throughout any sport in the halls because everything she did, she gave it her all. So we live our lives inspired by you for the red, white, and Columbia blue.
He was so humble, so kind, generous, looking
that the other person, it seemed to me always looking that the other person was getting what they needed. And somehow he got this just right, by habit, by nature, that it never was at the expense of his own strength and his own, to be as humble and as kind and as generous without compromising his character. He was all that, but also a strong man and a quiet man. That was always my impression of your dad. And the things that he accomplished and the things that, and the fruit that is there, he spent his time so well, it seems to me like. He spent his time on what was very important in his family, his community.
Carol had so many wonderful qualities. She just simply loved life. And I think she truly lived life to the fullest each and every day. She also lived her beliefs and her faith. And I love that about her. She was cheerful, energetic, happy, and she just loved a lot of things. I will always feel blessed to have been friends with Carol and Royale. And I will certainly treasure the memories of their friendship forever. And I'll love them forever as well.